Now that we understand how permissions work, how do we go about changing them? Well, you remember with ownership, we used chown, right? Change ownership. We're going to use chmod to change permissions. It stands for change mode, and that's what Unix refers to the mode of these files as being what it calls the permissions. So chmod, and then we're going to put in whatever the mode is. I'm just going to write the word mode as a placeholder. We'll talk about what the mode is, followed by the file name. And so we'll just put file name there. That's the format. Chmod, whatever changes to the mode we want, and then the file name. So let's look at some examples of what that mode might look like. So first, remember that we have three categories, right? We have user, group, and other. Notice the first letters of those, U, G, and O. We're going to be using those first letters to indicate where we want to make changes to, which category should get changes, okay? So U, G, and O, R, W, and X. So the first one I want us to look at is going to be changing user, group, and other, and setting them all equal to something, right? So I can provide whatever three letters I want there. I'm going to say R, W, and X. This is going to give all of them all three of those. Now, most of the time you don't want to do that. Most of the time you're trying to set different permissions for different people. So another way to write that out would be to say U equals and give it whatever permissions for U, followed by a comma, then the G equals whatever permissions it should have, and then O for other. User, group, and other. Comma separating them. That's a long thing to type, and I don't know anyone who really types it out that way. Typically, when you're changing the permissions, you know what the current permissions or something are. What you want to do is change it to something slightly different. You're like, oh, you know what? I wish that the user and group both had write permissions to this file. Well, to do that, you can just use the plus sign. Keep the existing permissions exactly like they are. All I'm interested in is for user and group, add the W permission. We can also do the same thing subtractively. We could say, all right, I want to take away the write permission from other. So plus and minus, it's typically the way people work. Instead of spelling it all out for each one, typically you just say, all right, here's the changes that I want to make. Now, as I said, U, G, and O are how we define the three categories that we're targeting. There's one other shortcut I want to show you, which is just that if you're trying to do something to all three of them and you're using UGO, you can also use A. So that's a shortcut. Those last two do the exact same thing. A means U, G, and O all together. Let's try it out so you can get the hang of it. Okay, I'm going to erase this line because that's not going to do anything for us. Let's do ls-la so we can see the current permissions. And I'm going to really target everything on this ownership.txt. You can use any file you want. You can just create a new file. You can see that the current permissions are read and write for the owner and just read for the group and other categories. So to begin, let's do chmod. And let's do user, group, and other equals so we can see what that looks like. And let's say R and X. And we'll do it to ownership.txt. So that's typically what a chmod statement looks like. Chmod, then what we want to do to it, followed by the file name. So we're going to add essentially an X to the last two, right? ls-la, and now you'll see that the X has been added to those two. You see that it actually took the W away from the owner as well because I set it to equals. So now let's try slightly different. Let's do chmod U equals RWX, and let's do group equals RW, and other is going to be equal to just R for ownership.txt. ls-la again. Now you can see how we changed it using that, right? So we broke it up using commas. We can also add to it, for example. So we can say chmod user group and other plus X for ownership, ls-la. There we go. You see that it added the X to it. And let's just do chmod A minus X so you can see what that does. ls-la again. You can see that it took back away the X. So now that you have the hang of how we specify these, let's see what the actual practical effects are of this. Let's try chmod and let's do user group and other. Let's take away their read privileges. Okay, so now we don't have the ability to read anymore. Let me just clear the screen so you can see it. So there we are. We don't have read privileges anymore. Let's try nano ownership.txt. Notice that it popped open nano, but look at the message that it gives us at the bottom. Permission denied. So I'm inside nano, but I can't do anything, right? I can type here, but I'm not actually inside that file. And when I say save, it's going to save to a new file. It's not actually reading the contents of that file into the buffer for me to change. I'm just essentially opening nano. So let's try now changing the ownership so that, let's say chmod, and let's say user group and other ought to be equal to read for ownership, right? So now we only have read permissions. We don't have write permissions. Once again, let's try opening up nano ownership.txt. Okay, so it opened it up. It read it fine. There's nothing inside this file to begin with, but it did successfully open it. Let's say hello, and now let's do exit, save buffer, yes, file name to write. Now I have the opportunity to provide a different file name, but I'm essentially now about to write onto this file. And I hit return. It says, oops, sorry, permission denied. So we can't write to it, right? We can write it to a different file name if we want. We still have the ability to save our changes, but we can't overwrite ownership.txt because we don't have write privileges. So I'll just say no to saving those changes. And let's go ahead and just set it back to chmod, and we'll make user gain its write privileges back on ownership.txt. Let's take one last look at it. And there we go. The other thing I just want to mention to you is that in addition to doing changes like this, if we have a directory and we want to change this to the directory, let's say that we want to do chmod, let's add the write attribute for group, and we'll write that for test.1, for that test directory. If we do this right now, it'll change it just for that top level one, same as the ownership did. If we want to change it to everything that's inside of there, we have to also include the recursive flag. So that's the option -R, and that will recursively change everything that's inside of there, directories and files, all the way down the line. So I just want to make sure you know we have that recursive option available to us. That's important if you're trying to change everything that's inside that directory to have the same permissions. That's really all you need to being able to manage permissions in Unix. You now understand what they are, you understand how to read the notation that it gives you there in the directory listing, and you now know how to manipulate them, how to enable and disable permissions for those three categories one way or another. But before we move on, I want us to take a look at how we can also specify these permissions using something called octal notation, and we'll do that in the next movie.